Hi guys, and welcome to my guide on the Slasher. So the Slasher is an interesting ship, I think. It's a ship that I don't really see all that often in low sec, although I think it's a ship that's very good at what it does. It's a ship that's can be pretty good in 1 versus 1 frigate duels, provided that you can find the right target. So the ship has a couple of good things going for it. It has very, very good base speed, and it has the smallest sig radius of all the T1 frigates, which is 30 meters. This is even smaller than the Stiletto's sig, and it's the same as the Dramiel. And with an Afterburner, it has enough speed that basically it can control range against almost anything. And just what makes this fit viable is that it's this raw speed combined with the slot layout that it has. So it's a ship that has 4 mid slots. And when you have 4 mid slots, if you armor tank the ship like I've done here, you have a spare mid slot that you can use for E-War. So I put a tracking disruptor in this ship, and this is something that's, I'd say, fairly common in low sec. You'll see ships fitting unbonus tracking disruptors. In my opinion, I think unbonus tracking disruptors in this game are just a bit too powerful. With turret destabilization 4 trained and with heat, the Meta 3 tracking disruptor that I have here will reduce optimal or tracking by 48% depending on the script loaded, which I think is pretty huge. It can make a very big difference in any fight just all by itself. So this ship really just takes advantage of that, and it wants to fight anything that primarily deals turret DPS. And also, ideally, you want to be significantly faster than your target, which will help you establish range. So that also kind of limits what it can fight. You really can't fight any missile-based ships, and you can't really fight anything that has significant DPS from drones. I would even include a Tristan in that. I think fighting a Tristan would be very difficult with the fit that I have here. In every fight that you take, you want to do either one of two things. You either want to establish a tight orbit, have a tracking speed script loaded in your tracking disruptor, and just brawl with faction ammo. Or the alternative, you either want to load your optimal range script in your tracking disruptor and just scram kite with Barrage. So against blasters and autocannons, you usually want to scram kite, and against railguns, artillery, or pulse lasers, you want to orbit. A Slasher has a couple problems with it though. The first, I think its biggest problem is that the DPS of this ship is just horrible. Even its on paper DPS here is just really, really bad. And just in any realistic situation, it's not even going to be able to do this much DPS because it'll either be having tracking problems with while it's orbiting, or it's going to be deep in fall off with Barrage. So in most of the fights I'm going to show, I really had to speed up the video in order to make this watchable because the fights really can take a very long time because the DPS of this ship is just so bad. And it means that you have to be very sure in any fight that you take that it's going to be a 1 versus 1 because you're really not going to be in any position to kill something quickly before their help arrives. The other problem with the Slasher, I think its tank is also really bad. It has very, very little buffer, and the active tank that you get from the armor repper here is just not very good either. And I find that this gives it very little margin for error, and it's just very unforgiving. If you make a piloting mistake in this ship, you're just going to get punished for it. So I have the fit open here, and I think for the most part it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm using a Meta 3 tracking disruptor and a Meta 3 Nosferatu just only because I have a bunch of them in my hangar and I'm cheap, I guess. You could also put a newt in the utility high. I thought about doing this, but I think for the most part you're better off saving your capacitor for your armor repper. You don't really have the capacitor to be able to run both. Although a newt I think would help beat things like maybe an executioner or a crusader maybe. But other than that, I think the use of a newt is really fairly limited. I don't really think the Nosferatu is particularly useful either, but it fits, so you just may as well use it. I really wish the Slasher had a launcher hardpoint so it could do more damage, but unfortunately it doesn't. So these are really just your only two choices. And I think the Nosferatu is just better most of the time. So I want to show in this fight that if you choose the wrong approach, that you're going to lose badly. So in this case, I had checked this pilot's kill board and I saw that he'd lost 4 consecutive micro warp drive rail comets. So when I engaged him, I immediately got a tight orbit on him. But it turns out this particular time that he was using neutron blasters. So in this case, being anywhere close to him is a very bad idea. And it's particularly bad to be orbiting him like this because a comet has a tracking bonus. So even with the tracking script loaded in my TD, it's really not going to help me win the fight. I think a comet is probably something I just shouldn't be fighting anyway because of their drones. It can be a problem. So what you should do against blaster ships is to scram kite with Barrage. But you need to prepare for the fight that lasts a very long time. So even though an Enyo only has 1 unbonus drone, I just killed it immediately just to take that damage off the field. I'm also orbiting because he has a rocket launcher and his utility high, and I'm trying to mitigate the damage from that. But even though this Enyo is buffer fit, this still takes a very, very long time. It's important to remember that Barrage does a mix of kinetic and explosive DPS, and an Enyo has a 90% kinetic resistance. So even though he's only buffer fit, this still takes several minutes. But still, just given enough time, and given that I'm not interrupted, I'm able to kill an assault frigate with a Slasher. I think this fight shows just how powerful the tracking disruptor can be, because this catalyst is using neutron blasters with null, and a catalyst has a double range bonus. It has a 50% range bonus to fall off and to optimal. So the range he's getting with his blasters with null ammo is about as good as it can be for small neutron blasters. And his DPS is really good too. I mean, a catalyst DPS with null is probably around 3 to 3.5 times mine is with Barrage. But still, I'm able to mitigate the majority of his DPS with my tracking disruptor. And I do have to be very careful here. I've really had to control my range very carefully and get to as close to the edge of scram range as possible. And I had to use as much heat on most of my mods, especially my tracking disruptor, as possible, but still I was able to get the kill. So I'm fighting another destroyer here, and I looked at this Thrasher's ship just to confirm which kind of weapons he has, and he is using autocannons. So in this case, you want a scram kite with Barrage. I think the one exception to that may be against a Rifter, because they have a fall-off bonus and they don't have a tracking bonus. So you may want to get a tight orbit in that case. But a Thrasher does have an optimal bonus, but an optimal bonus really doesn't matter for autocannons. Unfortunately, this Thrasher is using Hail, so I'm able to mitigate all his DPS with my tracking disruptor, and this fight goes very smoothly for me. I want to break down how I approach this fight against this Incursus, because an Incursus could be fit in a couple of different ways. It could have either blasters or railguns, and the approach you'd want to use in either case is going to be different. So I don't know how he's fit, but I decided to start off the fight by scram kiting. I have Barrage loaded and the optimal range script in my TD. And once I land my scram into my web, I immediately look at his ship to see what weapons he has, and I see that he has railguns. So in this case you want to get a tight orbit, so I changed my range. I immediately switched the script in my tracking disruptor, and I changed the ammo I'm using from Barrage to Fusion. This isn't a particularly great fight. He was a kind of a weird dual rep railgun fit, but I wanted to illustrate how you'd approach a fight in the case where your opponent could be fit either with long or short range weapons. I think if you're uncertain, it's usually better to start off by scram kiting until you confirm what kind of weapons he has, because you'll still be able to mitigate some of his damage from long range weapons, and you can get out and run away more quickly if something goes wrong, because you'll be closer to the edge of scram range. Against pulse lasers, you also want to establish a tight orbit, like I'm doing against this Crusader here. Because tracking speed for lasers is not particularly great, and I don't think range TD is strong enough to reduce the optimal range of Scorch far enough. And I think this fight is just another great example of how powerful a tracking disruptor is, because the Slasher could never beat a Crusader under normal circumstances. Even though the Crusader has a tracking bonus, I'm taking almost no damage here. I mean, I could pretty much just go AFK at this point and still win. So the tracking disruptor alone has just completely determined the outcome of this fight, and I just kind of think that's a bit ridiculous. This here's a rail Cormorant, so what you want to do here is just manually pilot to get close to him, land your scram and web, and then just get a tight orbit. And once you've done that, you basically just load faction EMP and then go make yourself a drink or something. At this point the fight's basically over. He can't track you with railguns at this range. In fact, the TD probably doesn't even matter in this case. You'd also want to use this same approach against the Coercer or Artillery Thrasher. So this fight against the Tormentor is a fight that I lose, and I want to tell you why. So Tormentor is a laser ship, so you want to get a tight orbit. I'm able to do this at the start of the fight, but I make a mistake, and once I'm close to him, I decide to stop heating my Afterburner because I'm a bit too nervous about burning it out. And then he does exactly what he should do at that point, which is double click in space, and he overheats his Afterburner. And by doing this, he's able to break my orbit, and that allows him to kill me. His speed actually gets up to 670 meters per second, which is actually how fast a skirmish-linked Tormentor will go with heat under a web, assuming he's a standard fit. But I mean, to be honest, I don't know if he's using links or not. There's other ways you could get that much speed, but it really doesn't matter. I think in a case like this, when you're trying to get a tight orbit while you're webbed, what you really need to do is to watch your overview very closely, particularly your opponent's velocity. And if you see them overheat their Afterburner, you need to counter heat as quickly as possible. I also think I probably would have won if I just heated my Afterburner for the whole fight. So although I was able to get some decent kills with this ship, I honestly don't really like it all that much. And now that I've made this video, I think I'm done with flying it for a while. I really just wish it did more damage. It's just so bad in terms of DPS. And while I was flying it, I kind of felt limited in terms of the type of targets I could engage, because you really have to limit yourself to ships that primarily do turret DPS. But it is kind of oddly satisfying somehow. I don't know what it is about the Slasher in particular, but it's just kind of satisfying to kill assault frigates with it. But I think I'm becoming a bit less interested in bringing counterfeits like this to 1 versus 1 frigate matches in general, just because I think if you do that too much, that people become less interested in fighting you. But I wanted to make a video on this type of TD ship because tracking disruptors really are a staple of low-sec frigate PvP, and I wanted to show what it's capable of. So thanks for watching.